You look like you're here for a cleaning job, not to own the place." Those words cut across the polished lobby like a slap to the face, dripping with arrogance and disbelief. Words that no guest should ever hear, and certainly not the woman who built the very empire they were standing in. Before we go further, I want to pause and ask you, where are you watching from today? And if this story moves you, take a second to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button, because your support helps us share these powerful stories with more people. Now let us step into the moment where dignity met prejudice, and everything began to change. Jasmine Harper walked into the Harper Lux Hotel in Atlanta with the calm of a woman who had worked all day serving at a charity event for underprivileged children. She carried nothing but a canvas tote and wore a simple cotton blouse with faded jeans. No security entourage, no assistant trailing her, no designer luggage announcing her status. To the casual eye, she could have been anyone, and that was exactly the point. She believed she didn't need to wear her success on her sleeve to prove her worth. But the receptionist behind the desk, Kayla Mendez, barely looked up before typing into the computer and saying with a flat tone, "I'm sorry, ma'am. I don't see a reservation under your name," Jasmine responded softly, her voice measured and clear. "It's under Harper. Jasmine Harper. I have the executive suite reserved." Kayla frowned, her nails clicking against the keyboard, and muttered, "No, nothing here. Maybe you're at the wrong property." Jasmine felt the familiar sting of being dismissed before being seen, but she stood tall, her calm composure never slipping. Then came Richard Blackwell, the manager, stepping forward with the swagger of a man too used to control. His suit was pressed, his smile was false, and his voice carried a sneer that made guests in line glance sideways. "This is Harper Lux," he said, drawing out each word as if explaining to a child. "Not some roadside inn. We serve high-profile clients here. You sure you're not here for the night shift?" That's when he delivered the line that would hang in the air, heavier than the chandelier above. "You look like you're here for a cleaning job, not to own the place." Guests gasped softly. A couple whispered. One woman even covered her mouth as if she'd heard something scandalous. Jasmine's eyes hardened, not in anger, but in recognition, because this was not the first time she had been underestimated, judged by skin, by hair, by clothes, by presence. But she had long ago learned that real power doesn't shout. It waits for the right moment to speak. Elena Vasquez, a guest standing nearby, shifted uncomfortably, her hand tightening on the handle of her rolling suitcase. She had her own scars with prejudice, but for now she only watched. Unsure whether to step in, Jasmine placed her tote on the counter and simply said, "I am Jasmine Harper, and I reserved the suite." Richard smirked as if she had told a joke in poor taste. "Lady, I've been in this business for 20 years, and I can smell a fraud from a mile away. Don't waste my time." The words landed heavy, echoing the same dismissive tone she had heard decades ago when she was a teenage waitress saving coins to pay for school. Back then, she promised herself she would one day change the industry, create places where people would be seen for their humanity, not their assumptions. But here she was, in her own hotel, treated like an imposter. The room seemed to tighten, whispers spreading, eyes darting between Jasmine's calm face and Richard's mocking grin. Kayla glanced nervously at the monitor, tempted to double-check the system, but Richard's presence loomed too large for her to resist. In the corner, Tyler Jenkins, a young intern shadowing at the desk, felt his stomach churn. He remembered the diversity training slides from orientation, the ones that warned about bias, and he could see this moment unfolding into exactly the kind of case study they had been told to avoid. Yet he remained silent, biting his lip, unsure of how to challenge the authority standing over him. Jasmine let the silence linger. choosing not to defend herself with raised voice or desperate proof. She had lived long enough to know that silence can be louder than shouting, and dignity can be more disarming than rage. Still, inside her chest, her heart pounded with the weight of déjà vu. She thought of nights bussing tables, of being told she didn't belong, of being shooed away from luxury spaces because she looked out of place. Each memory flared now, not as pain, but as fuel. Richard leaned in, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret with the onlookers. Trust me, folks, real owners don't show up dressed like that. A small laugh escaped from a couple near the elevator, a laugh Jasmine heard clearly, though it was muffled behind hands. She inhaled slowly, steadying herself, her eyes lifting toward the grand staircase where portraits of past luxury pioneers hung. She thought of her own portrait one day joining them, a symbol of resilience for anyone told they were not enough. But at this moment, the humiliation was real, public, and sharp. Elena finally spoke, not loudly, but enough to cut through the murmurs. I don't think you should talk to her that way. Richard turned, his smirk unfading. And I don't think you should interfere. Jasmine placed her phone gently on the counter, her thumb hovering over the screen. She had one number in mind, one call that could change this moment from insult to reckoning. She knew power when she needed to use it. And tonight, she would. But before she reached for that lifeline, she gave Richard one last chance, her voice calm, almost soothing. I will ask you one more time. Check under Harper. Jasmine Harper. His laugh was short and cruel. Ma'am, do yourself a favor and leave before this gets embarrassing. He didn't know how right he was. He didn't know that in just a few minutes. It wouldn't be Jasmine facing humiliation, but himself. And as the weight of those words filled the air, the lobby, once just marble and chandeliers, became a stage where arrogance was about to meet truth, and truth was about to win. Marcus Hale, the hotel's security guard, arrived with the heavy stride of a man who believed the badge on his chest still gave him the authority of the police force he once served. His eyes narrowing as soon as Richard pointed toward Jasmine like she was an intruder, and before she could even speak. His hand landed firmly on the counter, and his voice boomed across the lobby. Leave now, or I'll call the cops. I won't say it again. And his tone was not protective of the hotel's rules, but laced with a prejudice so thick that every guest in earshot felt the sting. Some pretending not to hear, while others pulled out their phones in anticipation of a scene. And Jasmine, standing tall in her cotton blouse and jeans, knew this was not just about a room anymore. This was about a system that too often mistook her dignity for defiance, her calm for weakness, her silence for guilt. But she would not bend. She had not built an empire to bow to ignorance. Yet Marcus leaned closer, his shadow covering her as he sneered. That afro and that cheap bag don't scream CEO, so unless you've got a mop in that tote, you need to move along. And the cruelty of his words was not just heard, but felt, ricocheting around the marble walls until even Kayla, the receptionist who had denied Jasmine moments earlier, shifted uncomfortably, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as though she wanted to double-check the system, but fear of Richard's reaction froze her in place. And Richard, emboldened by Marcus's presence, folded his arms with a smirk of triumph, whispering just loud enough. See? Even security knows what's going on here. While guests whispered, one muttering, She's causing a scene. Though it was clear she had done nothing but stand her ground. And in that moment, young Tyler Jenkins, the intern standing a few steps behind the desk, felt his throat tighten, because everything about this moment contradicted the values he had been taught in school, about service, about fairness, about respect. And though he was just 19, still learning the ropes, Something deep inside told him that silence now would make him complicit in a wrong that could not be undone. But still he hesitated. Fear tugging at his ambition, fear whispering that speaking up might cost him the internship he worked so hard to secure. And yet his eyes flicked to Jasmine, to the calm way she met Marcus's glare without flinching, and he knew he could not stay silent for long. But Marcus pressed harder, his thick hand briefly catching Jasmine's arm as though to physically steer her toward the revolving door. The move startling enough to make Elena Vasquez, the Mexican-American guest who had been watching with growing unease, raise her voice for the first time. "Hey, you can't touch her like that." And though her voice shook, her conviction was strong, born from her own battles with prejudice in boardrooms where her accent made men dismiss her ideas. And Marcus turned on her sharply, his eyes flashing with the old aggression that had once gotten him fired from the force. And for a moment, Elena thought he might lash out, but he only barked. "Mind your business, lady, unless you want trouble too." And the threat hung heavy, a reminder that his power came not from law but from intimidation. And Jasmine, still composed, looked down at the hand on her arm until Marcus withdrew it, realizing her unshaken stare was stronger than any struggle he could provoke. And then she spoke quietly, her words steady. "I suggest you let me stand where I am, because in a moment you'll regret every word you've just said." And though Richard laughed loudly, mocking her calm as delusion, Marcus frowned, unsettled by the certainty in her tone, because bullies thrive on fear, not on people who stand without flinching. And meanwhile, Kayla bit her lip, torn between the voice of her training, which told her to treat every guest with respect, and the voice of her manager, which demanded she fall in line. And in that silence, her heart thudded with guilt, because she knew she hadn't even tried to verify Jasmine's claim. And Tyler leaned closer to the monitor, his fingers brushing the keys as though searching for courage in the glow of the screen, whispering to himself, "Check it. Just check it." And when he did, when he finally typed the name Harper into the system, his eyes widened at what he saw, the record blinking clearly on the screen. Jasmine Harper, executive suite, owner-level priority. Yet before he could say a word, Richard snapped, "What are you doing? Kid, don't waste time on nonsense." And Tyler froze, the truth caught in his throat. And Marcus, sensing hesitation, puffed his chest and growled again. "Ma'am, I'm not playing. Last warning before I make that call." His hand hovering over the radio on his belt, and Jasmine let out a slow breath, her mind flashing back to another moment, years ago, when she had been 20 years old, standing outside a different hotel, denied entry because she looked like she didn't belong, her heart breaking as the manager told her to find another place to stay. And that memory had burned into her the vow that one day she would create a brand where no guest would ever feel like that. But here she was, decades later, in her own building, being told the same lie, and the irony cut deep. But she refused to show it. Instead, she lifted her chin and said evenly, "You've already made your mistake. I'll give you a chance to correct it." And Marcus scoffed. "Lady, you're nothing but a fraud." And the word fraud made Tyler's fists clench at his sides, because the system in front of him screamed the opposite, and he wanted to shout it, wanted to throw the truth into the air and watch it crush the arrogance before him. But he hesitated, sweat beading on his brow, while Elena, unable to stay quiet, pulled out her phone and said loudly, "If you lay another hand on her, I'm recording everything and posting it. Let's see how your hotel likes that." And suddenly the crowd shifted, the whispers turning into a low buzz. Because in this age, a phone camera could change destinies, could turn arrogance into headlines. And Richard paled slightly, though he masked it with a forced laugh, while Marcus scowled, torn between his instinct to intimidate and his fear of exposure. And Jasmine knew the tide was turning, knew that silence had carried her far enough. and with one calm motion she reached into her tote and drew out her phone, her thumb hovering over a number she rarely dialed. But when she did, people moved, and as Marcus leaned closer, daring her with his glare, she pressed the call button, her voice steady, almost casual. "I'm being denied at my own hotel. Fix it." And those words, though spoken quietly, sliced through the chaos louder than any shout, freezing Richard, unsettling Marcus, and stirring something fierce in Tyler's young heart. Because the truth was about to be revealed. And when it did, no one in that lobby would ever forget the night they tried to push out the woman who built the very walls around them. The call lasted barely 30 seconds, but its weight would echo for hours, because Jasmine Harper did not need to argue her worth to anyone when a single voice on the other end could shift an entire building into action. And as she spoke the words, "I'm being denied at my own hotel. Fix it," Richard leaned back, crossing his arms with a mocking chuckle, shaking his head as if humored by the absurdity, muttering just loud enough for the crowd to hear. "She's putting on a show, probably calling a friend to come pick her up." And Marcus snorted in agreement, one hand still hovering near his radio like a sheriff itching for a fight. But Jasmine slipped the phone back into her tote with the calm of someone who knew she had already won, even if no one else in the room could see it yet. And the tension thickened as Elena Vasquez, her own phone held tightly in her palm, raised her voice above the murmurs. "I am telling you right now, this is discrimination. I'll record every second of this if I have to." Her courage cracking through the arrogance that filled the lobby. And guests turned, phones lifting, eyes widening. Because in this age, the threat of a video going viral was more terrifying than any lawsuit. And Richard's smirk faltered for the first time, though he tried to mask it with a scoff. "Lady, nobody's interested in your little protest video. Go back to your room before you embarrass yourself too." But Elena didn't flinch, instead pointing the lens directly at him, her voice sharper. "No, the only one embarrassing himself is you." And the weight of her defiance rippled through the watching crowd. A ripple that Marcus tried to crush by stepping closer to Jasmine again, his voice low but seething. "You can call whoever you want, but until someone shows me proof, you're not staying here." And that word, proof, struck like a spark in Tyler Jenkins's conscience, because the proof was already glowing on the computer screen in front of him, clear as day. Her name, her reservation, her status not just as a guest but as the owner herself. And he felt his stomach twist with guilt for not speaking sooner, his fingers hovering above the keyboard, his lips trembling with the urge to say it out loud. But Richard's glare cut into him like a blade, silencing him before he could gather the courage. And so he did the only thing he could think of. He slipped his phone from his pocket beneath the counter and quietly typed a message, his thumbs shaking as he tapped. "System confirms you're the owner." And when Jasmine's phone buzzed softly inside her tote, she glanced down, her calm expression never breaking, though inside she felt a rush of gratitude toward the young intern who had dared to act in the smallest but most dangerous way. And she gave him a single subtle nod, a nod that said she understood, a nod that said his courage mattered. And Richard, oblivious to the silent exchange, pressed on with his theater, spreading his hands wide for the watching crowd. "See? This is what happens when people pretend. They get caught, and then they try to bluff their way out," his voice dripping with false authority. And Marcus added fuel by barking, "Last warning. Lady, either walk out now or I'll drag you out myself." And the threat hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and suffocating. But Jasmine stood tall, her silence screaming louder than their words. And in that silence she remembered another night. Many years ago, when she had been 20, traveling for a job interview, and after saving for months just to afford the bus ticket and a cheap dress. She had walked into a hotel lobby only to be told she wasn't welcome, told she looked like she didn't belong, told she needed to find someplace appropriate. And she had cried that night in a diner, eating a cheap meal she could barely pay for. But she had made a promise to herself that one day she would create hotels where dignity was non-negotiable, where no guest would feel small. And yet here she was, in the very empire she had built, facing the same poison that had once cut her down, and instead of breaking her, the memory fueled her resolve, her eyes sharpening as she looked directly at Richard and said quietly, "You've already made your mistake. All that's left now is how you'll answer for it." And though her voice was soft, it was strong enough to make his smirk falter again, just for a second, before he forced out a laugh and turned to the crowd. "She's delusional. Don't listen to her." But the guests weren't convinced. Their murmurs had shifted from skepticism to unease, and Elena's voice rang louder now. "Keep talking, because every word you say is going online." And she waved her phone like a sword, emboldened by Jasmine's poise, while Marcus glared at her with clenched fists, muttering, "These people and their damn cameras." And Tyler's heart raced faster, because he knew the moment was close. The moment when Brent Kessler would walk through those glass doors. The regional vice president whose presence would flip this entire lobby upside down. And though Richard laughed nervously, trying to maintain control, beads of sweat had begun to dot his forehead. And Marcus, sensing something shifting beyond his control, growled at Jasmine one more time. "You're done here." But Jasmine only whispered, more to herself than to him, "No, I'm just getting started." And as her words lingered, the automatic doors at the entrance hissed open, the sound slicing through the tense silence like a drumbeat. And everyone turned to see the sharp figure of Brent Kessler step inside with Carlos Reno at his side, their stride quick, their expressions grave, their eyes scanning the scene as if already knowing they were walking into a fire. And Richard's face drained of color as he stammered, "Mr. Kessler." "Sir, I was just handling." But Brent's raised hand cut him off, his voice firm. "Enough. We'll handle this in a moment." And though Jasmine hadn't said another word, her silence had already done its work, because in the span of one phone call and 30 endless seconds, the power in that lobby had shifted entirely, and Richard and Marcus, who just minutes ago wielded arrogance like armor, now stood trembling on the edge of collapse, unaware that their downfall had only just begun. And Jasmine Harper, the woman they had tried to dismiss as a fraud, was about to show them the true cost of underestimating her. The lobby froze as Brent Kessler and Carlos Reno strode across the polished marble floor, their footsteps sharp and deliberate, the kind of walk that made clear they had not come to negotiate, but to end a mess that never should have begun. And the air grew heavy with expectation as every guest leaned in, phones held steady, whispering questions to one another, while Richard Blackwell wiped the sweat from his forehead and tried to compose himself with a forced smile, blurting out, "Mr. Kessler, this woman is trying to trick us. I was just doing my job protecting the brand." But Brent's piercing stare cut straight through him, his voice calm but firm. "Protecting the brand is exactly what you failed to do." And in that moment, Richard's smirk collapsed into a twitch of panic, while Marcus Hale stepped forward, puffing out his chest like an old soldier defending ground that was already lost, barking, "Sir, I can escort her out right now. Just say the word." But Brent's hand snapped up in command, his tone laced with steel. "Stand down, Marcus, right now." And the authority in his voice silenced even the burly guard, who clenched his jaw but took a step back, muttering under his breath, while Jasmine Harper, still poised and calm, finally spoke, her voice even and measured. "I told you I am Jasmine Harper, and this is my hotel," and Carlos Reno, the district manager, confirmed it instantly, his tablet pulled up with the records, his tone sharp. Her name is on every deed, every contract, every system. She is the CEO and owner, and this treatment is unacceptable. And gasps rippled through the lobby, guests whispering in shock, a couple of them even shaking their heads at the audacity of what they had just witnessed. And Elena Vasquez, still holding her phone aloft, announced loudly for everyone to hear, "I recorded all of it, every insult, every threat, and I'll make sure the world sees what just happened here." Her words slicing through the tension like a blade, while Richard's face flushed crimson, his eyes darting wildly as if searching for a way out, his finger pointing toward Kayla in desperation. It was her. She mishandled the check-in. I was only stepping in to help. But Kayla, trembling with guilt and fear, shook her head, her voice cracking but audible. "No. No. You told me not to check again." I tried. And Tyler Jenkins, unable to stay silent any longer, stepped forward from behind the desk, his hands shaking but his voice strong with truth. "She's telling the truth. I saw the reservation. I saw her status. And when I tried to say something, you shut me down." And suddenly Richard stood exposed, his arrogance stripped away, the truth laid bare in front of guests, staff, and leadership. And Brent's jaw tightened as he said evenly, "We'll settle this in the boardroom, now." And Jasmine nodded, her calm command steady. "Yes, let's." And with that, the group moved, Richard stumbling behind them like a man being marched toward his own sentencing. Marcus close at his side, still muttering about fraud and caution. But the fear in his eyes betrayed him. And Elena followed close, determined to ensure accountability, while Tyler walked with hesitant steps, torn between the fear of retribution and the relief of finally standing up for what was right. And the boardroom doors closed with a heavy thud, shutting out the murmurs of the crowd, replacing them with a silence so thick it pressed on every chest, the long oak table stretching between them like a battlefield. And Brent began without ceremony, his voice clipped. "Richard, you will explain yourself, now." But before Richard could launch into excuses, Marta, the corporate HR representative who had arrived minutes earlier, laid a folder on the table with a sharp thud, her voice cool and precise. "Before he speaks, I think we should review the history of complaints against him." And the color drained from Richard's face as the folder opened, pages spilling out accusations of bias, inappropriate remarks, and mishandling of staff grievances, all ignored or buried under his veneer of charm and connections. And Jasmine, seated at the head of the table with quiet authority, leaned forward, her tone steady but cutting. "You mocked me, in my own lobby, in front of my guests, and you told me I looked like I was here for a cleaning job. Tell me, Richard, how exactly does that protect the brand?" And Richard stammered, his words breaking into fragments. I thought, I didn't know." But Jasmine cut him off sharply, her voice rising for the first time. "No, you didn't want to know, because you looked at me and decided I didn't belong. And that decision is exactly why you will no longer work here." And the words hit him like a hammer, his hands gripping the table as if he could hold on to his position with sheer force, sputtering. "You can't fire me. I built this place's reputation." But Brent's reply was merciless. "No, she built this place, and you just tore its reputation apart." And as Richard collapsed into his chair, pale and shaking, Marcus slammed his fist against the table, his anger boiling over. "This is madness. She's playing all of you. I know a fraud when I see one." And his words echoed with the bitterness of a man still chained to his own prejudice. But Carlos's voice snapped back coldly. "The only fraud here is the way you've used your uniform to intimidate instead of protect." And Marta added firmly, "You are hereby suspended pending full investigation, and if this video goes public, which it will, you should start preparing for what comes next." And Marcus's face twisted. caught between rage and shame, his bravado cracking as the weight of his downfall settled on him. And in that moment, Jasmine rose from her chair, her presence commanding, her words deliberate. This isn't revenge, this is justice. And it's not just for me. It's for every guest who has ever been treated as less than, and every staff member too afraid to speak. And her gaze swept across the room, landing on Kayla, who sat trembling, tears brimming in her eyes, whispering, "I'm sorry. I just didn't know what to do." And Jasmine softened, her voice firm yet compassionate. "Then learn, because silence is also a choice, and I won't let you or anyone else forget that." And Tyler, emboldened, added quietly but clearly, "I'll do better, I promise." And Jasmine gave him a nod, the kind of nod that carries both weight and grace, while Elena raised her phone one more time, declaring, "And now the world will see what happened here," her finger hovering over the upload button, the truth about to explode beyond these walls. And in that instant, the balance of power was clear. Richard fired, Marcus suspended, Kayla spared but bound to change, and Jasmine Harper, the woman underestimated, insulted, and nearly thrown out of her own empire, stood in quiet triumph, her authority unquestioned, her legacy defended. And as the boardroom doors opened again, the guests in the lobby saw not a woman shamed, but a leader who had just reclaimed her domain with dignity and resolve, proving once again that true power never needs to shout. It simply speaks, and the world listens. The boardroom felt heavier than stone, the silence punctuated only by the hum of the overhead lights, and for a long moment nobody moved, all eyes locked on Richard Blackwell, whose once confident posture had collapsed into slumped shoulders and trembling hands, his lips parting only to mutter excuses that fell flat before they even reached the air. But Jasmine Harper didn't flinch, her presence filling the room with the quiet authority of someone who had fought too hard to allow arrogance to escape accountability. And she leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut through every wall of denial. "You stood in my lobby, mocked me in front of my guests, and told me I looked like I belonged on the cleaning staff. Tell me, Richard, what part of that protects the values this company was built on?" And Richard tried to laugh, but the sound was hollow, brittle. "I didn't mean it like that. I was only trying to." But Marta from HR placed a hand flat on the stack of complaints in front of her, her tone unwavering. "You've had 3 warnings in the past 2 years for discriminatory remarks. This is not new. It is a pattern. And tonight you crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed." And Carlos Reno added firmly, "Your arrogance has become a liability, not an asset." While Brent Kessler nodded, his voice steady. "The decision is clear." But Jasmine raised her hand gently, stopping them all, because this moment was hers to define, not theirs. And she stood slowly, her chair sliding back with a faint scrape, her eyes never leaving Richard's. "You wanted to make me small in my own house, and now you will face the reality of what that choice costs you." And she let the words sink before she said with finality, "Richard Blackwell, your employment is terminated effective immediately." And the silence broke with a gasp from Kayla, a sob from the corner of her mouth quickly muffled, and a sharp curse from Marcus Hale, who slammed his fist on the table in protest. But Richard erupted louder, his face red, veins bulging in his neck. "You can't fire me. I've given 20 years to this place. I made Harper Lux what it is. I kept the rich clients happy while you hid behind your title. You need me." And his voice cracked at the end, desperate, as if clinging to a ledge that was already gone. But Jasmine didn't even raise her voice. She simply said, "No, Richard, this brand was built on dignity, and tonight you proved you don't even understand the word." And 2 security officers, summoned quietly by Brent moments before, entered the room and stood behind Richard, who froze, his eyes darting wildly, his pride shattering as the reality of his dismissal landed. and with a final outburst he shouted, "This is madness! You'll regret this!" But his words echoed without power as the guards guided him out, his shoes dragging against the carpet, his legacy undone not by rumor, but by his own arrogance. And the room exhaled a long breath as the door clicked shut, leaving Marcus Hale fuming in his chair, his fists clenched, his jaw tight, his voice bitter. "So what now? You suspend me because some woman claims discrimination. I was doing my job. I was protecting this property." But Carlos leaned forward, his tone cold. "No, you were abusing your position, intimidating guests instead of serving them. And now you will face the consequences." And Marta slid another folder across the table, this one thinner but no less damning. Excessive force complaints from guests, staff testimonies of harassment. Your record speaks for itself. And Marcus barked back, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and fear. "They're lies. All lies. I've kept this place safe. I've kept trouble out." But Jasmine finally turned her gaze on him, and her voice, low but unwavering, silenced even his protest. "The only trouble I saw tonight came from you, Marcus. And until you learn the difference between safety and prejudice, you will not wear our uniform again," and she declared with authority. "Effective immediately. You are suspended pending investigation, and if the evidence stands, you will be permanently removed." And Marcus stood suddenly, his chair screeching, his face twisted with disbelief. "Suspended. For doing my job. You'll regret this too." But no one moved to stop him as he stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook, his departure leaving a bitter echo behind. And in the silence that followed, Kayla broke down, her hands covering her face, tears slipping through her fingers. "I'm so sorry. I just didn't know what to do. I thought if I pushed too hard, Richard would fire me. I was scared." And Jasmine's voice softened, though it never lost its firmness. "Fear is no excuse for injustice, but it can be the beginning of change. You will not be fired, Kayla, but you will undergo full retraining, and you will learn that standing silent in the face of wrong is a choice you never make again." And Kayla sobbed quietly, nodding, whispering, "Thank you. I won't fail again." And Tyler Jenkins, the young intern, finally stepped forward, his voice shaking but sincere. "I should have spoken sooner. I knew who you were. I saw it in the system, and I froze. But I want you to know I won't make that mistake again." And Jasmine looked at him, the hint of a smile touching her lips for the first time that night. It takes courage to tell the truth when the cost is high, and tonight you found that courage. Never lose it. And his chest lifted with pride, his eyes bright with the weight of her words. And Elena Vasquez, still holding her phone, finally lowered it, her expression fierce with solidarity. "I'll make sure the world knows what happened here, because people need to see it. They need to know even CEOs, even owners, still face this kind of humiliation, and they need to know it cannot stand." And Jasmine nodded slowly, her voice carrying a quiet resolve. "Yes, let them see. Because this isn't just about me. It's about every guest who deserves respect the moment they walk through our doors. And every employee who needs to know this company will not tolerate bias. Not once. Not ever." And the boardroom fell silent again. But this time it was not heavy with fear or arrogance. It was filled with the weight of justice, with the sense that a new standard had just been set. And as Jasmine turned toward the window overlooking the glittering Atlanta skyline, her reflection staring back at her, she thought not of revenge, but of the girl she once was. The one denied entry at 20, the one who cried alone. And she whispered to herself, just loud enough for those closest to hear, "This isn't revenge, it's justice. And justice is what I came here to build." And the words lingered like a vow in the air, marking the moment when arrogance was stripped bare, when power shifted, and when Jasmine Harper proved that real leadership is not measured by how loud you shout, but by how firmly you stand when the world tries to push you down. The storm of confrontation had passed, but the aftershocks remained. And when Jasmine Harper asked for a private meeting with Kayla, Tyler, and Elena, it wasn't to scold or to grandstand. It was to build, to teach, and to heal. Because she knew the real work of leadership didn't end with firings. It began with transformation. And in the dimly lit staff break room, stripped of chandeliers and marble, surrounded instead by vending machines and worn couches, Jasmine sat not at the head of a grand table but across from them, her posture relaxed yet commanding, her eyes soft but steady, and she began not with accusation but with a story, her voice warm. I was once in your chair, Kayla, behind a desk, nervous, under pressure, terrified of losing my job if I made the wrong call. And Kayla, eyes still red from tears, looked up slowly, her breath catching. Because hearing those words from the very woman she had doubted and dismissed only hours before felt like being pulled from a storm into the safety of shore. And Jasmine continued. When I was 19, I worked the night shift at a budget hotel in this city. My shoes had holes in them. My uniform was second-hand, and one night a guest shouted at me, called me names I won't repeat, and my manager told me to stay quiet, to smile, because the guest was always right. But in that moment, I felt smaller than I ever had before, and I promised myself I would never let silence define me again. And her voice cracked just slightly, the vulnerability shining through the steel, and Tyler leaned forward, hanging on every word. Because in Jasmine he saw not just a CEO, but the version of himself he hoped to become. Someone who turned pain into power, mistakes into lessons, and silence into a platform. And Kayla whispered. I froze. I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't think you could be who you said you were. And Jasmine smiled gently, though her eyes carried weight. That's exactly the problem. Kayla, you saw my skin, my clothes, my tote, and you let them tell you a story that wasn't true. But every person who walks through those doors deserves the benefit of truth, not the judgment of appearances. And Kayla nodded, tears spilling again. I understand now. I want to do better. Please give me a chance. And Jasmine replied firmly, You will, because I don't believe in throwing people away for one mistake. I believe in teaching them how to stand taller after it. And then she turned to Tyler, her voice filled with something almost maternal. And you, Tyler, you saw the truth, and though you hesitated, you found your courage, and I want you to know it matters. Your voice matters, even when you think it doesn't. And Tyler's face flushed, his chest swelling with pride as he stammered, I was scared, but when I saw how calm you were, I couldn't let them win. And Jasmine nodded slowly. That calm comes from years of scars, but you don't have to wait that long to use your voice. Promise me you won't wait next time. And Tyler, his eyes bright, said without hesitation, I promise. And then she turned to Elena, who had been quiet, watching with the steady strength of someone used to being overlooked. And Jasmine reached for her hand, gripping it firmly. And you, Elena, you stood up when others stayed silent. You threatened to record. You raised your voice, and you showed courage that this brand desperately needs to celebrate. Because change doesn't just come from policies, it comes from people willing to speak. And Elena's eyes watered, her voice low but fierce. I've been dismissed too many times, in boardrooms where men laughed at my accent, in meetings where my ideas were stolen. So when I saw him mock you, I couldn't keep quiet. And Jasmine squeezed her hand. That is why voices like yours are the future, because you know what it is to fight to be heard. And for a moment, the room felt like more than a break room. It felt like a sanctuary, a place where scars became stories and stories became lessons. And Jasmine leaned back, her voice carrying conviction. I want all of you to understand something. Bias isn't just about grand insults. It lives in the small moments, the sideways glances, the assumptions, the hesitation to believe someone belongs. And if you work in hospitality, you cannot afford to carry those blinders. Not here, not ever again. And the words sank deep into each of them, heavy yet liberating, because they knew they were being given not just a warning, but an opportunity to grow. And Kayla spoke again, her voice trembling. What if I fail again? What if I don't know how to fix myself? And Jasmine reached across the table, her tone gentle but unyielding. Then you get back up, because failure is not the end. It's the test. And if you keep showing up with humility and courage, you won't fail. You'll change. And Kayla wept openly, not from shame, but from release, while Tyler sat straighter, ready to shoulder the responsibility she had handed him. And Elena smiled softly, her phone now resting on the table, not as a weapon, but as a symbol. Because the video she had recorded was more than evidence. It was a torch. And Jasmine turned her gaze to it, saying, that video, Elena, it will travel, it will be shared, it will spark conversations. But make sure it's not just about humiliation. Make sure it's about change. Because I don't want clicks. I want culture shifted. And Elena nodded, her voice steady. I'll tell the story right. I'll make sure they see the bigger picture. And Jasmine smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. Good. Because the world doesn't need another scandal. It needs a reminder that dignity still matters. And the room fell quiet again. The kind of quiet that doesn't weigh but uplifts. And Jasmine rose to her feet, her presence filling the space, her voice lowering into a closing truth. I built Harper Luxe not just for luxury, but for legacy. And that legacy will not be marble floors or crystal chandeliers. It will be how every guest is made to feel, how every staff member is taught to serve, and how every mistake is turned into growth. And she placed her hand briefly on Kayla's shoulder, then Tyler's, then Elena's, leaving each with the warmth of her conviction. And as she stepped toward the door, she paused, turning back with a final message. You don't need to shout to be heard. You just need to know who you are and walk like it. And with that, she left them sitting in the dim break room. 3 people forever changed by one night's lesson. 3 voices that would carry her message forward. And though the world outside still buzzed with whispers and cameras, inside those walls, something deeper had shifted. A culture beginning to bend toward justice, carried not just by policies but by hearts reshaped in the quiet power of truth. By the next morning, the incident at Harper Luxe had already moved far beyond the marble floors of the Atlanta flagship. Because Elena Vasquez had kept her promise and uploaded her video, and within hours it had spread across social media like fire racing through dry grass. Millions of eyes watching as a black woman, quiet and dignified, was mocked in her own hotel, only to reveal she was the very CEO who had built the empire, and the world did what it always does. Some gawked, some raged, some debated, but most were inspired. And in every comment thread, the same message kept echoing. Dignity matters, respect matters, justice matters. And while Richard Blackwell vanished from the headlines in disgrace, and Marcus Hale retreated into the silence of suspension, Jasmine Harper chose a different path. Not victory laps, not angry tirades, but reform. And from her office high above the city, she drafted a message to every employee across the Harper Luxe chain, her words deliberate. We are more than marble floors and chandeliers. We are a promise of dignity. And that promise begins with how we see people, no matter what they wear, where they come from, or what we assume. Effective immediately, every member of staff will undergo comprehensive anti-bias and empathy training. Every manager will be held accountable for complaints, and every guest, from the wealthiest to the most humble, will be treated as an equal. And when the email hit inboxes from Atlanta to New York, from Miami to Chicago, the ripple began. Some resisted, some complained, but many felt relief. Because finally someone at the very top had said out loud what too many had ignored for too long. And as weeks passed, the video didn't fade, it transformed, being used in training seminars, in college classrooms, in community discussions, and everywhere people ask the same question. How often do we judge before we know? How often do we silence someone who simply doesn't look the part? And Jasmine knew that was the real victory. Not just the firings, but the dialogue that lived on. And months later, when she returned quietly to the same Atlanta flagship, this time greeted not with suspicion, but with respect. She walked the lobby not as a woman seeking validation, but as a leader ensuring change. And she spotted Kayla at the front desk, her shoulders straighter, her smile warmer, her tone measured with care as she welcomed a weary traveler in worn clothes, offering them water without hesitation. And Jasmine felt a quiet pride, because growth had taken root. And in the corner she saw Tyler, no longer just an intern, but now shadowing a manager, his notebook full of ideas for guest experience reforms. And when he caught sight of Jasmine, his eyes lit with the kind of respect born not of fear, but of gratitude. And Elena, too, had grown, her business finding new strength as she partnered with Harper Lux on diversity initiatives. Her voice amplified far beyond that night in the lobby, and together they had become symbols of a culture refusing to bend to prejudice. And as Jasmine prepared to leave again, her suitcase small, her presence understated, she looked once more at the portrait wall where her own photograph had now been hung. Not in ostentation, but in honor. A reminder of the journey from waitress to CEO, from being told to leave to being the one who set the standard. And she whispered softly, words meant for herself, but left behind for anyone who might need them. You don't need to shout to be heard. Just know who you are and walk like it. And with that, she stepped out into the Atlanta sun, the hum of the city alive around her. And the story of one night's humiliation turned triumph had already become something greater. A legacy, a message, a call for others to rise when the world tried to push them down. Because power is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet, steady, and unshakable, carried in the walk of someone who knows exactly who they are. Thank you for watching this story. If it touched you, please give it a like so more people can see it. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories of dignity and justice.